There's a phone call that divides your life into before and after. Maybe it's a doctor. Maybe it's a police officer. Maybe it's someone you love and their voice sounds different. And you know, before they say anything, that the world has just shifted beneath your feet. One moment, you're a person with a plan, with a tomorrow that looks roughly like today. And in the next moment, everything you thought was solid turns out to have been glass all along. This video is not about how to avoid that call. You can't. This video is about what happens after, about the thing that separates the people who are destroyed by it from the people who, somehow, impossibly, are not. And I need to tell you something important before we go any further. What separates them is not what you think. The myth. We have a saying, you've heard it 1,000 times. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. It sounds true. It sounds noble. It sounds like something a person who survived something terrible would say on a stage with a microphone and a spotlight. But it's a lie. What doesn't kill you can absolutely leave you diminished, shattered, smaller than you were before. Ask anyone who's been through real trauma, not the kind you post about, but the kind that rewires your nervous system. The truth is much less poetic. What doesn't kill you simply doesn't kill you. That's all it guarantees. What happens next, whether you grow or collapse, depends on something else entirely. And it's not willpower. It's not positive thinking. It's not grit or discipline or any of the words we like to put on motivational posters. The ancient Stoics understood this. Epictetus, a man who was born a slave, whose leg was deliberately broken by his master, said something that sounds simple but is actually revolutionary. It's not what happens to you, it's what you do with what happens to you. But even Epictetus doesn't tell the whole story. Because doing something with your suffering isn't a choice you make once, it's a process, and it begins in a place no motivational speaker ever talks about. The body in crisis. When a crisis hits, a real one, not a bad day, but the kind that takes the floor out from under you, the first thing that responds is not your mind, it's your body. Your nervous system shifts into a state that's been well documented, but rarely explained to the people who need it most. Your breath becomes shallow. Your muscles tighten, especially the shoulders, the jaw, the belly. Your digestion slows. Your sleep fragments. Your immune system quietly begins to withdraw. This is not weakness. This is your body doing exactly what it was designed to do: survive. Redirect all resources to the emergency. Shut down everything that isn't immediately necessary. The problem is, your body doesn't know the difference between a tiger and a diagnosis, between a predator and a phone call. It responds the same way. And here's what almost nobody understands about resilience. It doesn't begin in the mind. It begins in the body. Before you can think clearly, before you can make meaning, before you can find perspective, you have to give your nervous system permission to come down from high alert. You have to breathe, not as a cliche, as a biological act of reclaiming your ground. In holistic practice, we know this deeply. The body is not separate from the crisis. The body is where the crisis lives. And any path forward that ignores the body is not a real path. The two circles. There is an idea so simple that it almost feels insulting. And yet, when you truly understand it, not intellectually, but in your bones, it changes everything. Imagine two circles, one inside the other. The inner circle is everything you can influence: your breath, your next decision, the words you choose, how you treat yourself in this moment. The outer circle is everything you cannot change: the diagnosis, the accident, the loss, the fact that it happened, the fact that it cannot be undone. Most people, most of the time, spend their energy in the wrong circle. They fight what cannot be changed. They replay the moment. They ask, why me? Why now? Why this? They negotiate with a universe that doesn't negotiate. And I want to be very clear, that's not wrong. That's not weakness. That is the most natural human response in the world. Of course you fight it. Of course you rage. Of course you bargain. But at some point, and it's different for everyone, there comes a moment where you have to ask yourself a different question. Not why did this happen, but what do I do with the fact that it did? A 23-year-old has a skiing accident. In 1 second, his life divides into before and after. He will never walk again. That is the outer circle. That cannot be changed. But who he becomes in the face of that, what his life means from this point forward, whether he is defined by the worst moment of his life or by every moment that comes after, that's the inner circle. And that circle, as small as it may feel, is infinite. The Tao Te Ching puts it this way: the reed that bends does not break, not because bending is easy, but because bending is a form of intelligence. The body and the soul know how to yield without surrendering. What resilient people actually do. So what actually separates the people who survive a crisis from those who don't? It's not optimism. Resilient people are not optimists. In fact, many of them will tell you they had no hope at all in the darkest moments. It's not faith, though faith can help. It's not community, though community matters. The research on post-traumatic growth, and this is one of the most important findings in modern psychology, points to something much more subtle. Resilient people don't deny what happened. They don't minimize it. They don't skip to the silver lining. They hold two truths at the same time. This is the worst thing that has ever happened to me, and I am still here, and that means something. Viktor Frankl, who survived the concentration camps and spent the rest of his life trying to understand how anyone survives anything, described it as the last of human freedoms, the ability to choose your attitude in any given set of circumstances. But I want to add something that Frankl doesn't always say explicitly, and that I think is crucial. You don't choose your attitude once. You choose it every morning. Some mornings you can't, and that's part of it too. There is a concept in holistic healing that I keep coming back to, the idea that the body moves toward wholeness if we let it. Not perfection, not recovery in the sense of going back to what was, but wholeness, a new kind of intact that includes the wound. The Japanese have a word for this. They call it kintsugi, the art of repairing broken pottery with gold. The cracks are not hidden, they are illuminated, and the object becomes more beautiful for having been broken. That is not a metaphor for pretending everything is fine. It is a metaphor for what happens when you refuse to throw yourself away. The larger picture. There's a dimension of resilience that science doesn't fully capture, and I want to speak about it honestly because I think it matters. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes, surviving a crisis requires you to trust in a larger coherence that you cannot see. Not blind faith, not magical thinking, not the toxic idea that everything happens for a reason, because telling a mother whose child is paralyzed that it happened for a reason is not wisdom, it's cruelty. But there is something between everything happens for a reason and nothing means anything. And that something is, I don't understand this. I may never understand this, but I choose to believe that this is not the end of the story. That is not weakness. That is the deepest form of courage there is. Choosing to keep your heart open when every part of you wants to close it. The Tao Te Ching says, "The way that can be told is not the eternal way." Sometimes the pattern only reveals itself in hindsight. Sometimes it never does. And living with that uncertainty, without collapsing, without hardening, is perhaps the most human thing we are asked to do. The lesson. So here's the lesson nobody taught you about surviving a crisis. You don't survive it by being strong. You survive it by being willing to be completely broken and still choosing to be here tomorrow. Not because tomorrow will be better, maybe it won't, but because you are more than the worst thing that happened to you. And the version of you that exists on the other side of this, the one with the gold in the cracks, is someone the world needs. You don't become stronger because of what happened. You become deeper, and depth is worth more than strength. If you're in the middle of something right now, if you're in that place where the ground is gone and you don't know how to stand, I want you to know that this feeling is not forever, even if it feels like it is. This is part of a series called Lessons Nobody Taught You. Each video is one chapter of a bigger story about the things we were never told but always needed to hear. If this one reached you, the next one is already waiting.